Hi friends, my name is Rohan Roy, and in this video let us continue our project of Tic Tac Toe. So this is the second video in the series. If you haven't watched the first video, I urge you to go back and watch it. I will put the link down in the description. Otherwise, let's continue. So before we get to the coding portion of it, I will quickly recap what we did in the previous video. So in the previous video, we described the problem statement of tic-tac-toe and we discussed the flowchart, how the flowchart was divided into sub-processes and how they were interacting with each other. And also we drew a rough sketch of the how the UI will look like using pencil project. If you haven't watched the previous video, the link is down in the description and I will urge you to go back and watch it so you can understand the context of it. I will transition my screen. So we had already worked on index.html and styles.css. Now I will put a script here. Let's just type script and I will give it an source of, let's just call it main.js. It's basically our main.js file. It will contain all the logic, all the coding that we are going to do. Okay, command click, create the file, and I will save this. So before we get any further, we need to select these things from the HTML. So we need to define some IDs. I defined it for the game grid, but I didn't define it for the select. So I will name it game actions select and I will name this as game actions reset, right? And I will save it. As discussed in the flow, we need to select, we need to have a message somewhere where we can put the message, the game has been won or lost or tied, stuff like that. So we will put that inside the grid itself, so we can disable the grid when the message pops up. So I will name it, I will give it a class saying game message, and I will give it a ID equal to game message, same thing, right? And I will save it. Of course we need to style it too, so I will copy this tag and go to the CSS file and style this. Okay, so I need to, when the message pops up, it should take the entire portion of the grid and we shouldn't be able to click any button, right? So for that we need to add position as a relative. So when we add when the game message pops up, it should be relative to the game grid and not the container or not the body, right? So we will put position relative and we will put position as absolute. Position absolute, what it does is it picks that child and arrange it relative to the parent and not where it was positioned originally, right? So we need to give it some top as 0 pixel and left as 0 pixel. So we don't need to define, we can just say 0, and we will add width as 100% and we will add, we didn't put semicolon, okay, we will add height as 100%, so it will take up the entire screen, entire grid. And after that we need to show display as flex. For now, just we will show I will show what I'm trying to mean. So I will say display flex and I will say align items as center and justify content also as center, right? So it will take up the entire screen, it will take up the entire width of the thing, and I will refresh and see what I'm trying to say. So I cannot click it right now because there is an overlay of span over it, right? I will show you here, right? So this game message is right now on top of the game grid. So right now we can't click. Even if I try, I cannot click anything, right? I cannot click anything, it's disabled. So by default this should be this should be display as none. So by default it will not be visible, and I will refresh my screen. By yeah, by default we can click something, but if the game is, let's say, already done, then we should then the message should pop up and the grid should be disabled. Okay, and we need to like, it cannot be just like that, right? We need to give some background color. I will give it RGBA with 0 0 and 0. This will indicate, so RGBA will take red, green and blue values from 0 to 255, which is like the 255 is white, 0 is black. Let's just say it like that. And when we add red, green and blue as same, it will be some shade of gray always, right? So I give it a black value with some opacity of say point, so opacity is from 0 to 1. So we will give some fraction, so let's just say 0.5 and see what it does. I will give display as flex so we can see the grid over it, the message over it. Okay, so this is how it will look, right? And why didn't we just overlay it, right? Or why did we make it transparent? So user can still see the choices that both the players have done. It will just be an overlay over it, right? So I will reset it to none and then move on. Okay, so we have our JS file. I will put the entire functionality inside an arrow function and then call it, right? And did I use, no, I didn't use differ. So what differ does is it will when the client fetches this page in the browser, then it will first render, it will first parse the HTML, then it will run the script. So differ will wait till the entire HTML is parsed through. After that, after entire HTML is rendered, after that it will run the script. So apart from that, we will put this entire thing inside a arrow function. We don't need to do it, but I like it personally, so I will do it. And after that I will define some things. So I will get back to the flow once more. So we had some initial values, right? So we had players, options and messages, and current player as user and message as empty by default. So what we will do is we will first of all define some maps, some enums basically, that will indicate. So why do we need enums? Why don't we just use a string instead of this? You need this kind of approach because suppose at some later point in time this code became huge, right? And and you want to rename user to player 1 and computer to player 2, right? And so you have to do this everywhere in the code, and you don't want to do it. You just want to rename this in one place, and everywhere we will use this object, so it will reflect everywhere. So we don't need to do it everywhere, right? So I will just say user as user. It's just, we don't need to do it here, but let's just do it for the sake of good practices. Okay, I have computer. I will give options, and I will say x is equal to, so I have some hexadecimal already, so I will quickly replace them. And for O we have, okay, you can search it. If you find a better hexadecimal, then please feel free to correct me down in the comment section. And of course we can use a bootstrap library. Okay, so that's it. After that I need to define our messages. messages, and that will be 1. You have won the game, right? And lost, sorry, you have lost the game, try again, right? It doesn't hurt to be polite, so just say sorry. Okay, and I will say tie, this game is a tie, and after that we have our empty string, and that is just an empty string. That's it. Okay, and we will define our current player is equal to players dot user. So let the user begin. You can make this of course as computer. Let the computer first begin. I will make it player. Okay, after that we need a map, right? So each player will have a specific option. So for example, user will have X, so respectively computer will have O. So we need to make it map user option map, and in that what I will do is I will map the players. So players dot user, and what he will do, I will map it to a specific option, that is say X, and players dot computer respectively will have O. Okay, and I need to flip it. I need to flip this map. Basically I need to map an option with a user, right? So if I can do this manually, right, that option X will map to user, option O will map to computer. But just to show you, like if this was say a huge object and there are say hundreds of properties in it, right? So you don't want to do this manually. So this is a small object, we can do it manually too, but for the sake of let's just say I want to let option player map, and I want to make the value as key and the key as value. That's it, right? So I need to first of all fetch the keys. So we will use object.keys for it, and after that I will reduce it. We need to reduce it, we can't map it because we are first of all converting an array into an object. So that's what we are going to do. We'll put semicolon, and then we will put an arrow function. So the first property is arrow, the second property the first property inside the reduce function is an arrow function, and the second property is the initial value, right? So I will put an arrow function first of all, and I will give it an initial value that is an empty object, right? And inside this arrow function I will get some properties. So the first one is always the accumulator, that is the initial value, always the previous value. So this reduce will loop through the array, iterate through the array one by one. So the every time it iterates through an element, the previous whatever we did previously will be the first parameter. So let's just say this as an option map, and inside this we will get our player, that is the key that we are getting, and we will do something nice like a spread operation. Let me quickly show you what I mean by that. Let a equal to x1 and y as 2, and let b equal to spread operation of a, right? And right, So by using spread operator, I created a copy of A and assigned it to B. So whatever I change inside the B, the immediate properties that are inside B are the copies of A. So whenever I change B now, A will not be affected. But that's not the case for nested objects. I will make a dedicated video for objects that we will take a deep dive into it, and I will help you to play around with objects and understand how they work in detail, right? So I will just quickly show what I'm trying to say. So I will say b dot x is equal to 10, and I will print b again. So right now x became 10 and y still is 2, right? And I will print a and c. But like I said, for a it didn't matter because right now b is a copy of a. We took a copy of it and put it in b. Let's just say put it like that. And I will say options map, and for so we need to flip the objects, right? So for that, what I will do is I will give player option map dot player. This will provide me with an option and I will map it to player, right? So the key will flip, right? So that's what we did here. Let's move on. After that, let's see what the design says. So there are reset, user selects a different option, computer click, user click, and check grid for success. First of all, before we get to that, before we get to these functionalities, first of all we need to fetch everything from the HTML file, right? So as I said, we needed those IDs there. So what I will do is I will use const, let's just name it as options actions select, and I will use document dot query selector, query not query selector, get element by ID, and I will use the game actions. I will rename it to game actions select and game actions select. Game actions select, I will then fetch game actions reset. This will fetch the reset button. Document dot get element by ID, game actions reset, and after that we will fetch the grid container. This will not fetch the actual buttons, this will fetch the grid container. So game grid is equal to document dot get element by ID again, and we will use game grid, right? And I will also fetch game message, document dot get element by ID game message, right? Apart from that, we also need to fetch the buttons itself. I will refresh this. So I need to fetch the buttons itself. So for that, I will give a space and say game grid items, and I will use in this game grid dot get element by tag name, get elements by tag name, and inside this I will use button, right? So inside the game grid, whatever buttons are there, I will fetch them. That's one thing. Apart from that, I also need options. Whatever options are there inside the select, I will show you why. So let's just say game actions options, and I will use game action select dot get elements by tag name, and I will fetch the options. Yes. Okay, this will give me collections. What does this give me? This will give me HTML collection of a particular element, right? So now game grid items will give me a list, a collection of buttons. We need to convert this into a grid and pick up whatever content is inside that button, right? So we will create a helper function called get grid values. And do we need anything in this? I don't think so. Let's just use, okay, so first of all, we will define a grid, a variable called grid values, and it will be an empty array. So we need to convert an array into a grid, right? So I will quickly explain what I'm trying to say. So let a equal to, we already defined a, let x equal to, right, we created an array, and I want to convert this one dimensional array into a grid of 4x2, just to make it a different use case, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through this for each, and I will take item and index, right? These are the things that I need, and I will, what am I going to need in this? So I'm going to need a row index and column index, right? So what will be the row index? So I have an array with indexes from 0 to 7, right? Indexes always start from 0. So I have indexes from 0 to 7, where the first row will contain 0 to 3, second row will contain 4 to 7, right? So so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all divide the index itself, right? So from when 0 to 3, when I divide it to divided by 4, it will give me some fraction. I'm going to floor it, I'm going to use math.floor to round it down. So the from 0 to 3, it will always give me 0 index, right? So let's just code it. Math.floor, I will say index by 4, right? And after that I will have to do, I have to calculate column index next, right? So what will be the column index? So the column index cannot be more than 4, cannot be more than 3, okay, from 0 to 3, 0 1 2 3, and then again 0 1 2 3, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say index mod 4, so it will never exceed 3, and I need to put it inside a variable. So for that I will say let y equal to an empty array. We cannot use empty array directly because we need to initialize this. This will be a two-dimensional array. What I mean by that is this array will contain an array, right? So I will say array dot from. We can also use spread operator, but I will just use from here, and there will be two elements in the array that will be empty array, right? So 2, and I will put both of them as empty. We don't need to initialize the inner arrays because we can just use the index, right? So I will just say row index and column index equal to item, and then enter, right? And I will just quickly, yeah, you can see here that we converted this array into a grid. Okay, is there a better way to do it? Please comment down, please describe in the comment if you found a better way, maybe using reduce or map or something like that. But this is easier to understand, and you can, like, you will never forget once you know this logic, right? So this is very easy, and people can understand what you are trying to say. So we have to first of all initialize this array dot from, and I will say array of 3. So there will be 3 items inside this array that will again be arrays, right? And I will use game grid items, and I will use optional chaining for each. I could just convert this into an array using array.from again, but I will not, like, we don't need to do it, right? So I will just say grid item, and what I will do here is I will use the same logic that we did there, but I will use row index as, we also need to fetch the index, right? And index by 3. So I will round it down, and I will also say column index equal to, I will take a mod. This will give me a remainder basically, and I will say grid values row index and column index equal to grid item. Grid item right now is the element itself. We don't want that. We want text content, right? And then we will just return this grid values, right? I will give us a line so this is more readable, and this is our get grid values. After that, let's just move on to our flow that we worked on in the previous video. In this, what we did, we decided how to check the grid for success itself. So select grid items, iterate rows, iterate columns, stuff like that. Okay, so we will just create our function here called, did I save this? I will save it. I will refresh, no errors, and I will say check grid for success. So okay, so check grid for success, we need to first of all get the grid values, right? I will keep the name same, and I will use get grid values, and we don't need to pass it any variables. So I have a grid now, right? And I will also, before I check it, I will just say that if the game message, right, if the game dot message, I mean if the game is already won, right, then we don't need to run this function. This function is basically useless. So what I will do is I will just say if the game message dot text content is not equal to messages dot empty. I mean if there is some message already put there, I mean the grid is disabled already, that means the game is done already, right? So we don't need to run this function. So I will simply return it from here, and inside this function I have to loop through it. I will give it a line, and I will have to loop through this, right? So I have a 2-dimensional array. I can just simply loop through it using for loop. Okay, and this will, so we already know what will be the size of the array. It will be 3. So let's just go with 3, and for row index plus plus. After that we will loop through the columns, right? Okay, we are going to do something else also that we already discussed, but let's just write the loops first of all. Column index plus plus, and we have both the loops, right? Now in a grid of 3 cross 3 there will always be 2 diagonals, left diagonal and right diagonal, and there will be 3 rows and 3 columns, right? So let's just define the diagonals first of all. Okay, let, or just make it const, left diagonal equal to empty and right diagonal is equal to empty. Initialized it to empty, it will be a one-dimensional array, and we are going to put the diagonal elements, right? So what will be the diagonal elements? It will be 0, 0 index, 1, 1 and 2, 2. Okay, so we'll put it inside the left diagonal dot push. The values will be grid values, row index and row index, right? 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, right? And what will be the right diagonal? Right diagonal will be 0, 2, right? 1, 1 and 2, 0. That will be the right diagonal. I mean, in the 0th row, we will pick up the last column. When we are in the first row, we will pick the first item, and when we are in the second row, we will pick the 0th item, right? That's how you can think about it. So right diagonal dot push grid values, row index and 2 minus row index, right? 2 minus row index. That's how we can get our diagonal. So for each row we will get one row and one column, right? So we need to define row as an empty array and column as an empty array, right? And what I am going to do is so what will be the row dot push is equal to game values. Where did it go? Game values, sorry, grid values, excuse me, grid values, and we will pick up row index. This will give me an array, and then column index, this will give me the item, right? And column dot push grid values, column index and row index. So I have, whenever I iterate through this loop, the entire loop, then I will get a row and a column. That's what we get. Okay, and before we move any further, we need to check if the entire row matches or not, entire column matches or not, or the diagonals match or not. Diagonals we will do after the upper loop is done, but we can match the row index and the row and the column right now. Okay, so for that, what I will do, I will create another function here. So what this will do, it will check basically the items, right? So I will say is items equal, and first of all items need to be defined also. The empty items we will ignore, right? And I will say, and we need items as an array, and what we are going to do is items optional chaining. I will say every item, for every item we need to run this, and I will say item is put an arrow function inside it, and I will say each item should match the first item. Items 0, right? Each item should match the first item. Otherwise, just return false. We have a function that will basically, we need to put another condition that says the item should itself be defined first of all, and the first all the items should match the first item. That's it. Put an end condition, and we will check. So we need to set player as null. So we need to see which player has won, right? If the row matches or the column matches, then then a particular player has won. So suppose I am a user, I am using X right now. So if all the rows are matching X, then user has won. This is where option player map will come into play, right? That's why we defined it first of all. So we are going to use if condition, and inside this if condition we will check is items equal the row. If the row matches, then we will say player equal to option player map, and inside this map we will put the key as row, the first element of this row. Since it is matching, we can pick up any element, so I will just pick up the first element and then break out of this loop, right? Where is the design? So this is what I'm talking about. If the row matches or the column matches, we will break out of the loop. Otherwise we will initialize both of the both row and column as empty, and again iterate through the loop, right? So this is what we will do here, and put a else if condition that says is items equal column and player, either row matches or the column matches, right? So option player map column of 0, and then break out of the loop. Once we get our winner, we don't need to loop through the rest, and we can just break through it, right? After that we need to check if the left and the right column matches, right? So if the player is already defined, then we don't need that, right? So we will first of all say if the player is null. So if the player is not defined, and is items equal left diagonal, right? And then we will set player equal to option player map left diagonal 0th element, right? And say I was about to write break, sorry, we don't need to break because there is no loop. Okay, there, and then say player and is items equal right diagonal matches, then player equal to option player map, this is not a function of course, and I made this a function, excuse me, that's why I wrote it again, and I will put right diagonal 0th value. Okay, so there is a possibility now that the game is already won, right? And if it is not, if any of them, if this condition doesn't match and also this condition doesn't match, then we need to check if the grid is full or not. How we will check this? So since we are iterating through the grid anyway, we will just check if any of the items are missing in the grid, right? So we will just put a is full variable and just assume that it is true. We just need a single button that is empty, right? So we will say by default it is full, and I will loop. Since we are already looping through it, I will just check if the grid values, row index and column index is defined or not. If it is defined, sorry, if it is not defined, excuse me, if it is empty or null or undefined, if any of those values are true, then we will set is full as false, right? So we will have a falsy value. So now we need to set the message here, right? So if the game is won, then we need to set the message. So let's say we have a new message, and what we are going to define it. Okay, so if the player is players.user, right, then we know that it is one. Then we know it is one. Pages dot messages dot one. Otherwise we will check if the player is this, by the way, I'm using a ternary operator for those of you who don't know. So players, so we can of course use if else also, but sometimes I prefer using a ternary operator. It makes coding a bit easier. Okay, so we have players, if player is computer, then I will define messages as lost. You lost the game, right? And otherwise, I will check if the grid is full. If the grid is full, that means I need to set messages dot tie. No one has won. Else messages dot empty. That is the new. That is going to be the new message. Right. So I will just make it a bit more readable and use brackets for it. I will put this inside a bracket. Right, we have a new message. Now we need to do some things, right? We need to set the message in the span, and we need to change the style from none to flex, right? So we can just quickly create another function called set game message, right? And this will just take a message which is of type messages. This is not TypeScript, of course, but you can just think of it that only these 4 values will come into this message, right? And we will just say that if game message, the element, this is the element, right? If it is not defined, then we will just return it here itself. We don't need to go inside the function anymore because it's not defined. Someone has made an error. I have made the error, right? Otherwise, we will set game message dot text content equal to message, right? And I will say game message dot style dot display, right? So we will change the display property of it, and I will just say if the message is equal to messages dot empty, that means I will remove this span. Otherwise, so I will just say flex otherwise, right? So we set our message here, and what I will do is I will call set game message with new message. So the game message, we checked the entire grid for the success or ongoing, right? If the game is ongoing or if it is not. And after this, we need to define some more functionality. First of all, if the user clicks on a grid cell or a computer clicks on a grid cell, right? So for that, we will just need the element itself. We don't need the event. So every whenever you add an event listener, you pass it a function, right? So by default, that function will receive an click event, but the computer can't generate, or the computer, let's just say the computer won't generate a click event by itself. Only the user can generate a click event, right? So we will just pass the button element and not the event itself, right? So just to make it clear, I will come to I will explain what I'm trying to say, right? So inside this, so we will create another function and we will name it, what did we call it here? User click, let's just say. And we need 2 things. First of all, we need the grid element, which will be the button, and we also need who did it, right? Player. So this can be either user or computer. Okay, first of all, we need to check 2 things. If the grid element itself is not defined, then we will just return it. We need to we have to check 2 things. First of all, if the grid element itself is not defined, that is one scenario. The second scenario is, so I have 9 grids, right? When I click it, it will occupy some it will take up the value of X or O. So if this if the button has if the button contains already a value, then we will ignore it, right? So we will just create another function which will just check this for us. Is grid item empty? We are creating a lot of functions, so this will just make things easier, so you don't have to write the the codes again and again. So I will just define grid element. So the grid element has to be defined first. So what would you consider as empty? First of all, there has to be a grid element. First of all, if it is there is no grid element, then it should return false, right? And then I will say grid element dot text content. If this is empty, null, or undefined, then I will say it's a true, otherwise it should return false. So if there is no element, then it should return false. If there is an element and it is not defined, then it should return true, otherwise false, right? So we personally know that this element will always be defined. We are just being extra cautious here. So I will say if is grid item empty, so I will pass it a grid element and it will check it for us, right? And next we need to assign the player value. So we know that the grid element is empty, so we need to assign it something, right? And we need to assign it text content equal to player option map, and we will pick up the player's option. So player. So after that, after the grid is assigned some value, we need to check whether the game is the game is still ongoing or not. Okay, so we need to run this function. And before we go any further, we will check if game message dot text content is not equal to messages dot empty. So if there is a message displayed like won, lost, or tie, then this means that the game is over. We don't need to go anymore into the function. We can just return it from here. Otherwise we will check if it is now computer's turn to play, right? So we will just say if the player is user, players dot user, then I will say now it is the computer's turn to play. So I will say we will create another function for it called computer. So I will say computer game grid click. This is a function that we haven't defined yet, and I will say I will just call it. We don't need to pass it any variables. And I will say computer game grid click, and inside this we don't need anything. So what do we need to do in this function? We need to select empty grid cells, randomly select a cell, and then click on grid cell, right? I am going to say empty grid items, and what I am going to do, I am going to convert the grid items. This is the grid item, game grid items, right? So I have a collection of buttons. I'm going to convert this into an array. This is not an array yet, right? So I will convert this into an array first of all. I'm not sure whether this will work or not, but let's just try it. Game grid items, and then what we will do is we will filter out the empty. So we have our empty grid items, right? So for now we will just randomly pick up a grid item, right? Before we get any further, how do we randomly pick something from a grid, right? So first of all, we are going to use something called math.random. This is right? It is going to give me a number between 0 and 1 first of all, right? So suppose I have an array of 8 elements, right? And I want to randomly pick up something from it. So the index, what should be the index? Index should be between 0 and 7 in this case, right? So I will say math dot random, and I will multiply it with x dot length, that is the length of the array, and it will give me something between 0 and less than 8, and it will give me a fraction also. So what I will do is I will round it down. So I will round this thing down. I will say math dot random and into x dot length. So this will give me a number, an integer between 0 and 7, between 0 and 8, right? 8 is not included. So 4 7 7 1. So you get the point, right? And then we can use this index to pick up something, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to say empty grid items, and inside this array we will pick up, we will do math dot floor, and inside this we are going to say math dot random number, and then multiply it to empty grid items dot length. Let's just, it will give always an array, right? So we don't need optional chaining here, at least. Okay, and we now have a random grid item. Now we can use this to say game grid click, and we are going to pass this random grid item, and the player in this case is predictable, so it will be computer, right? And then the recursion will happen. Okay, so that is how we will do it. Okay, we have our, so let's go back to the flow. We defined these two functions, and now we have a reset function and user selects different option. So I will first of all create the reset button click functionality, and then I will just test it to see if this is working or not, right? So I will just say, yeah, I will just name it to reset grid. Let me just refresh the page. Okay, reset grid. And do we need anything in this function? I don't think so. We'll just reset it. So we need to reset the grid. For that we will say game grid items dot for each, and inside this we can just say game grid item. This is an arrow function which I will use to say dot, oh, we can't use option chaining here, dot text content is equal to empty, right? This will reset the grid. And apart from that, we need to also reset the message, right? So we can simply put set game, we can simply call set game message with empty message. So set game message with messages dot empty. So we need to swap the players. So in the first turn, so when the first time user comes into this page, user is going to play first. When he resets, then computer will play next, and so on, right? This cycle will happen. So we need to swap the players, right? So now the current player will become players dot so we need to check whether the so we need to swap it, right? So we need to check if the players is user, then it will become players dot computer, and vice versa. players dot user, right? So we swap the players, swap the current player, and after that we will check, we need to check if the current player is computer or not. If it is computer, then we need to call this function computer game grid click. Okay, so I will just quickly open the flow and check if I did it right. Yeah, swap the current player, set the message as empty, current player is computer, then start the process, otherwise stop. Yeah, I did it correctly. Now we need to add this function as an event listener and this function as an event listener to the button and the grid buttons and the reset button, right? So for that, what we are going to do is game actions reset dot add event listener, and we will add an event for click event, and just directly call reset, just directly assign reset grid. We don't need, since we are not we are not passing any variables to the function, we can just directly assign the reset grid, right? And we will pass game grid items, this is the variable, and we need to, for each of the button, we need to assign this function as an event listener, right? So we will say for each of them, I have game grid item, and I will assign game grid item dot add event listener, and in this case I will assign this right now. See, this is what I meant. So we can't directly pass the event here, so we can't directly put the function straight away. We need to convert the, we need to extract the element from the event itself, right? So in this function we are going to get a click event, right? And from this click event we will pick up the element itself. So we will call game grid click with event dot target, and if this listener is being called, that means the player will always be user. So we can quickly check if we did anything wrong. We'll test this and check if it is working or not. We did. Game grid events dot for each is not a function. Why? So okay, can we convert this into an array? Just quickly check. If that is true, then we can't we can't use it inside, right? So we can't use it inside the get grid values also. So I will just convert this into an array. Can we do something else? Can we maybe use, so let's just use let's just not convert this into an array. Okay, let's just use query selector all. In that case, I am sure we will get something like, so this will give me node list of. Node list of also is not an array, right? But it has for each function inside it, so we can use this to fetch the buttons. Okay, so we clicked and user picked up O, then this, you won the game. I will reset it. I will, next time I didn't click anything, right? User is now the player, and I will deliberately try to lose. Come on. Yeah, sorry, you lost the game. And now I will try to tie. Right. And the game is a tie. So we are not properly able to see the message itself. So I will raise the opacity to say 0.8. 0.8 is more visible. Yes, and I will say color as white. So the reset and the bare bones of the game is working now, right? Sorry, you lost the game, try again. Yeah, so the but we cannot see properly the what we did. You won the game. Yeah, this is fine. This should be fine. Yeah, and I will increase the size of the character itself, right? So I will say dot game grid, and I will say font size to, this is right now grid of 8 rem, right? Let's just put 5 rem and see what happens. Sorry, game grid and button. Right, this should be fine, and you won the game, right? Let's just increase the opacity to say 0.6. Sorry, you lost the game, try again. Okay, it's visible. So till reset it's working fine. And now we have another functionality left, that is if user selects a different option, right? And say in the, I am starting the game, I don't like X, right? I go and select O, and after I select O, the board should reset, and my option should now become O, right? That's the thing. So we need to create a function for this. So I will name it change user option, right? And I will, do we need something in this? I don't think so. So okay, so it's a function. Okay, so what do we need to do in this? We need to change the user option and check if and then swap the options, right? So we need to first of all user changes the option. Yeah, we need something, of course we need something, so we need event. So from this event we will get a new value that will be of course hexadecimal, right? So it will be either x represented, it will either be a cross represented by hexadecimal or a circle represented by another hexadecimal, right? So what, this is what we will get. So for that we need to check, so we need to see if the target dot value, we will pick up the target value, right? And we will assign it to a new function. My battery is low, I will put it in charging. Okay, so we have a new value, right? And then we will check if the new value is equal to the old value, that is player option map players dot user. Then we don't need to go any further into this function, and we will just opt out, we will just move out of this function, we will just return it, right? But if the new value is different, that means that we need to swap it, right? So we need to first of all player options map dot players dot user will become the new value, that is either X or O, and player options and dot computer, this will become, so we will check if the new value is equal to options dot X. If it is options dot X, then it will become options dot O, and otherwise it will be options dot X. So that is the thing, right? Right now the option contains character alphanumeric character X, capital character X and O. We need to replace that with our hexadecimal, right? So we will get to that. So we swapped our player option map. We need to also reassign the option player map that will be equal to this, right? I won't create a new function for it just for the sake of expediency. So I renamed this, and I after that I will reset the grid. Do we need anything else to need to do anything else? I don't think so. We will reset the grid, and we need to add this as an event listener. So first of all, I will set the options. I will say for each, and I will say game action option and game action option dot we need to set both text and value, right? So what I will do is I will say game action option dot text content is equal to options, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fetch the options. So const options is equal to object dot values. Why not keys? Because keys is for us, for our reference, so we can write it properly, but the actual thing is the hexadecimal, right? So I will convert the options in options dot we will pick up the values from the options map and options object and put it in a array, right? And we also need index, right? And I will say options index. Same for the value of this select of this options of the option tag. So I'm setting both value and the text content. Okay, options index. Okay, so I set my options now, and I need to also set game actions select. I need to set an event listener for it. I will use optional chaining, add event listener. I will say if the select value is changed, which will be the change event, and I will say then directly use change user option directly, right? That's it. I will refresh and see if we are getting any errors. Okay, if I change it, then right now I am the current player. If I change this, then it should reset and the computer will become the current player. Okay, computer will put X, I will put O. You lost the game. I will reset, and I am still O. I won the game. Okay, we'll reset. Oh, I shouldn't have reset, but okay, let me just put X again, right? So that time computer was playing. Right now I will be the first user. I will be the first player. So I will put X, X, X. You won the game. X, X. Sorry, you lost the game. Okay, and I will deliberately try to. Okay, I will reset. This should reset, right? So O. Now the computer is the first player. Okay, now I will deliberately try to tie. Oh, okay, sorry. Let's just. Okay, this game is a tie. So this is the game of tic-tac-toe, and I will commit this, and I will push this in the repository. I will put the link of that GitHub the GitHub link down in the description. You guys can clone it and play around with it. Let me know if you guys have any questions down in the comment section. It can be any question, doesn't have to be technical. You can ask me anything. Also correct me if I have done anything wrong here, or you have a better implementation than this, you guys can put it down in the comment section. So this is my logic. I will conclude this video here. In the upcoming video, I will help you to run this application using Node.js, and I will also help you to deploy this application in the cloud. Finally, if you have any questions or just want to provide me with some feedback, please write them down in the comment section and I will get back to you. Please like this video, subscribe and hit the notification icon so you will be able to know whenever I publish a new video. Please share this video with your friends and family. This will help me grow my channel. Thank you for your time. Have a nice day. Merry Christmas and a very happy new year. Namaskar.